Hey everyone, I'm Jason, and I want to talk to you today about Tesla's version 12 of their software. Effectively, Full Self Driving has been out for the best part of 3 years now in its beta form. So, there's different software iterations over the years have evolved and improved the system, but this is the big one. This is the full rewrite, if you like, or a massive progression in terms of what's done in AI. So, there used to be around 300,000 lines of human crafted code in the platform. That's going to shrink to as little as 3,000 lines. And so what I want to touch on, there's been a lot of talk since Elon did the live stream over the weekend from version 12 in the car. And I want to talk about some of the potential limitations of this new approach. But let's start out by just talking about the crazy numbers that are on this video. So the post itself has 42.5 million views. The video, 11.1 million views at the moment. And I watched it all on the weekend. I've rewatched it a couple of times. The video itself is pretty terrible in terms of the way that it was shot. Somebody buy that man a GoPro because, yeah, we'd like to see more of the screen while it's driving and more of the yoke, some Model S. So I guess the takeaway is this is the big architectural change, the big rewrite. We've had some architectural differences or changes in the past, but this is it's not quite throw it out and start over. But what they've been able to do is reach a point of sophistication in their data flow and their data engine that allows them to effectively fire in video and get command and control out. So let's walk through each one of those pieces because that sounds magic, it sounds crazy, and it sounds like it shouldn't ever work. But what we've seen on the weekend was that it kind of does. I guess I want to start by saying that my expectation was pretty low. I thought, what we have in version 11, not in Australia obviously soon, but in version 11 of Full Self-Driving beta, it's doing pretty well. It's driving city streets, it's turning corners, it's taking roundabouts, it's doing amazing things, but it's not perfect. And so my benchmark was that version 12 had to be as good as version 11, and I think what we've seen on the weekend shows that it's in a really good spot. It is still in alpha, so it's not in the hands of consumers yet. But I don't think that's too far away. If I had to guess, certainly before the end of the year. So we're 3 months out from the end of the year. Yeah, almost at September now, so nearly 3 months to the end of the year. I think it's in consumers' hands. Maybe in the next month or two would be my guess. Maybe they're doing a couple more builds of version 11 to tweak that out while they're building this, but that'll basically just be bug fixes at this point. So back to the main focus of what I want to talk about is how this thing actually functions, because as I said, it feels like it shouldn't work. So in the car, they've got essentially what used to be a software stack where it used to be largely human written when it first started out. So like recognize these objects was the first, image recognition kind of challenge. And then you'd have to label the data to say, well, okay, when you see this kind of thing, that's a bike or that's a person or that's a mailbox, and then attach different properties to each one of those to say, you know what, the gutter's never going to move, the mailbox is unlikely to move, the bike is going to move a lot slower or faster than the car beside you, those kind of things. So understanding what each one of the objects was the path they were going down, and then the trajectory they could map forward to say, hey, is that thing going to cross in front of my path? Is it something I care about or need to worry about? And if the answer is no, then happily plan a route through the environment and you're fine. All of that was good, important steps to get us where we are now. But the in-between bit was then things like the occupancy network, which was, hey, out of this scene, we need to extract effectively a depth map out of this, and then say, is there anything that has got substance and value to the properties of it? So it's not a sheet of paper, it's a box or it's a car or a bike or a human in the way. But there's something in the space, in the environment that you want to pay attention to that means that is not drivable space. And that's sort of opened the door to this migration from just recognizing the lane lines and sticking specifically within the lane lines to open the door to say, hey, look, yes, I shouldn't cross to the wrong side of the road, but there are circumstances in driving behavior where there's maybe a double parked car or whatever that means humans go around that vehicle. So if you strictly keep it locked to just use the lane lines, you're going to fall short of what it actually needs to do. So determining the available space to drive in was a great concept, a good way forward, but it required a lot of work, obviously, as well. So each part of these kind of the stack, if you like, was being migrated to AI and using what they call neural nets. And so Tesla would take all the video from the cars in their fleet, close to 4.5 million cars that are hardware 4 equipped, and that's across the world. So they don't just use US data for this. It's my understanding is it's global data that helps contribute to this. So they take that driving data, and they used to attach like classifiers to it and say, hey, give me a set of data that is XYZ, or use cases or examples of, driving on roads that are like X, or that have stop signs or give way signs. And they would train their AI models on that video data. And then once they've trained that and they produce a model, then that gets injected into a software release and then distributed to the cars. And it would go through, employee vehicles and then out to customers ultimately. And so that was all great, but this when you look at the mission or the goal of what Tesla are trying to achieve, they want to achieve full autonomy and they want to do it at scale. So this is the biggest differentiator between Tesla's approach using vision and a lot of the others. The others are going to map cities, and sure, they're able to get into 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe even a dozen cities there might be in the next couple of years. But that's really time intensive, and then you've got this maintenance task of updating those maps all the time, keeping them current when you have things like construction, that kind of thing. So they've got their work cut out for them. If you ask me which is the best path that can scale to countries like Australia and other parts of the world, potentially very quickly, it's definitely Tesla's approach. So they don't have to do these. They don't have to take that same route of mapping every city, every country in the world. What they're saying they can do now with version 12 is effectively they feed their AI model a bunch of video data of people driving. And from that data, the model can work out what it should do based on the environment the car finds itself in. So if you take a car, Tesla's vehicle, Elon Musk's car, and you load it with this latest build of the software, with the latest model that's created from this new technique, and you say, drive here, it needs to know nothing about the world. And this is like the craziest thing in the world. As I said, it shouldn't work, and it sounds like magic. So to see it working is kind of like bizarre and ridiculous. And there's lots of questions that come out of it, and so we'll talk about those in a second. But so you feed it all this data, and then it kind of knows how to drive, which I think if the way I rationalize this in my head is if you're a child and you grow up with your parents driving you around and you kind of been in a bunch of cars and you kind of like know how roads work, even if you haven't done your license test or whatever, conceptually you kind of know how roads work and how vehicles move through it. Even if you're not like actually thinking about it, you kind of have taken enough journeys in cars that you know how the thing works. And I feel like this is almost the same as that. Like computers understand conceptually how cars would drive through an environment, even if they've never been to that specific environment. So with an understanding of how to drive a car, then they kind of let it loose and they go, okay, now you know how to drive. Well, go drive there. And from point A to point B, we seen Elon drop a few pins randomly on the map and the car navigated to that location and took the turns, stopped at traffic lights and stop signs and navigated through construction zones and that kind of thing. So it's a crazy concept. And maybe the most bizarre thing of it all was when it pulled over to the side of the road and stopped at the end of the journey. Now that's new. We've never seen FSD Beta do that before. It couldn't park itself. If you've been paying attention to every one of the beta testers and their videos they publish online, effectively the start and the end of the drives is where the humans have been doing the bit. And so until that piece of the puzzle was solved, Robotaxi was not possible, right? Like it's not. You have to do all of the drive, not just the 90% in the middle. You've got to do the start and the end. And if this thing can literally pull out from a gutter and go for a drive and reach a destination, pull into a gutter and stop, unload passengers, new passengers get in, takes off and does the next road, that's the basis for Robotaxi being possible. Now, it doesn't mean we're there and it doesn't mean they're going to deliver it tomorrow, but those big check boxes have to get ticked before we can even really realistically entertain, going anywhere near regulatory approval and those kind of things ahead of us. So with this kind of I guess model that's fed by video, now it's time to talk about the shortcomings, right? So just because you fed a bunch of video, even from around the world, as diverse as that is, from millions of vehicles, that there are times where it needs a certain amount of data, and that's what Tesla doesn't tell you. It doesn't say, hey, they say we've got millions and millions of hours of video from millions of cars, but ultimately, if there are times, and there certainly are, parts of driving and parts of the world on the road that are unique and kind of different and need different behaviors to appropriately navigate that environment. And the shortcoming that we see in the video, the one intervention in 45 minutes, which is on the surface is amazing. That's great. But the one that we did see is at a stop line, and it took a green arrow as a green light, and it wanted to proceed. So Elon sort of talked about this, and it was really great to hear him and Ashok Elashwamy, who's the director of AI there now, that they basically were talking during the feed, which is awesome. It was really, I think, insightful to understand what we were seeing a little better, even if the video itself was not framed really well. I think we got a better understanding from those conversations. And so what they were talking about is the way that we fix that is that we feed the data engine more examples of that scenario. So they need to now go to their existing data set or put classifiers on the, basically requests to the fleet and say, anytime you see that environment, capture those video frames and send it back to us, because we'll punch that into the training model for the next run, and we'll get better and solve that problem. Now, solving problems is the big task here, right? So the reason we don't have it beta in Australia right now, I think, is because the to-do list on the beta in version 11 and previous versions included so many things that they would need to accommodate in different countries that they just weren't ready to deploy the engineering effort on that. And probably the compute resource. And they've talked about that in the video as well, about Tesla investing heavily, like a couple of $1 billion this year, a couple of $1 billion next year on compute alone to do this modeling of the data. So rewind 3 years when beta first came out, the compute necessary to achieve what they're doing now probably wasn't available to them. And even now it's really expensive. So back then it would have been really, really expensive. So that said, basically, if you have a shortcoming like this, you've got to throw more data at it. They've got to collect the data from the cars and then retrain the model. Previous estimates were that the retraining process takes a couple of weeks to retrain the whole model. There's some discussions around whether they can do partial retraining and speed that up and iterate faster. But if it is 2 weeks, they need to throw more compute at it, bring that down to a week, bring that down to a couple of days, and then really just spin that flywheel a lot faster. So the thing that we're missing, the big piece of data that we want to know, is how many things on the to-do list are there, and then how are they prioritized, right? Now, clearly going through an intersection and misinterpreting a light, that is potentially a very risky thing, and they need to solve that. That's what's in alpha now, that they're not releasing that. So I could see a path where they solve this specific thing. They can get a ton of data very quickly from the fleet, retrain the model, and then produce a new software version that actually has solved this issue. The question is, how many of those experiences are there? And that's the big bit we don't know. And now we're just talking about how many are there in the US and Canada that the beta is in right now. But Elon tweeted this week, which is really great to hear as somebody outside the US, that they're going to focus on the international release. And that's really, I think, the first time that I've heard them talk about that. There's still no dedicated timeline, and there's no hard and fast commitments that it's going to be with us a month from now. But we've seen them making moves in terms of hiring and those kind of even shipping software versions of the builds into Australia that had the code, the FSD beta code. Now that happened this year, and prior to that, no vehicle in Australia had the beta code on them. It's disabled for us, but our understanding is that the employees in Australia are using that. So all of that sort of comes together to say, well, okay, what are the gaps? What are the holes? Well, let's say that they've got all this training data, but then they go to a new market that is like Australia and we've got hook turns in Melbourne, for example. Well, they need to have, if hook turns in Australia are the only place in the world, they need our data and they need a certain quantity. And what we don't know is how much. Is 1,000 clips enough? Now, let's say we have 1,000 cars in Melbourne, and on an average day, like maybe 100 of them come anywhere close to a tram, and then maybe they need a certain intersection of those two vehicles. So the tram has to be stopped, and then the car comes up to it, at a 90-degree angle, and then the tram takes away, and then the car proceeds. Maybe that's the scenario they need to improve on. Maybe there are 5 other scenarios. So is 100 cars producing data for a week enough, or do they have a much longer, more detailed data set that they need for that? And then the other question is how much can be simulated, right? We've seen Tesla produce and show off their amazing simulator. Can they represent these challenges accurately enough in the simulator to produce the training data to then go and model it on? Now, the thing that makes me think the answer to that is no, that they can't use the simulator, is this hardware 4 discussion that's happening right now. So Elon put out a tweet and said, we're going to focus on international, and that means that hardware 4 is going to lag behind the hardware 3. Now, logically, if you've got 1 million people outside of America that want beta, that are probably prepared to buy FSD to get beta, but you've got 100,000, let's say, in America that have bought hardware 4 cars that want beta, well, I know which one I'd go after. I'd go after the million, right? There's a bigger revenue stream there on the table. Yes, you might have some alienated customers in America itself that potentially have already either subscribed or bought FSD outright. But I think that's the better of two evils, because you could unlock this not to 1 million, but as Shanghai and the other international, Berlin, those plants ramp up, they're spitting out millions of cars for the rest of the world kind of thing. So for me, and maybe this is me selfish in Australia who wants it really badly, maybe for that reason alone, that's a better approach. But I think it's a numbers game. And then they will certainly get around to deploying for hardware 4. But very interesting they have to retrain the models per car, because guess what? There's another car coming to their lineup very shortly. So we're seeing more and more Cybertruck sightings every day. There hasn't been an official launch date or delivery event date. We've seen the referral giveaways. So we know it's coming. It's not too far away. And they had committed by the end of Q3. So we're getting awfully close to that now. We've got a month left. And if they're going to hit that target. So I'd expect the actual date to be announced any day now, so people can book flights and travel and that kind of thing. So with all that said, I do question sort of what is the to-do list, even with this amazing new approach and methodology to delivering AI, to delivering FSD using a lot more AI, that end-to-end AI that they've talked about, of just video in and then it builds a model that can effectively drive, and then the car drives. You let it drive, and it drives. And then, of course, there's a whole other bot discussion as well, right? So if you've got this technology now that with enough data, you feed it the data, the video data, and it knows how to move around a world, well, that sounds awfully nice to have when you're building a robot that needs to move around the world, right? And to interact with other elements and humans and those kind of things. But the job for that robot isn't to drive, right? So the job for that could be vastly different, and every business and every person, if it gets to that, every person who wants a robot, their task for that robot's going to be very different, individualized. So just because you get to train it on how to move around an environment and navigate its way through doesn't mean you automatically get to how to do jobs. Now, if they can say, right, we apply the same theory to just feeding a lot of video data, and so as long as we have this technique, like you point a phone at somebody doing a task and call it, that's the task A, if you can take enough of that data and then feed it into the model, and then the robot learns the task, like a manufacturing task, for example, like let's say it's put a wheel on a car in a factory, if they can replicate that, then that's amazing. I mean, that really is the great unlock, because it's not driving anymore. It's like anything that you can think of that you can shoot with a video. There are some things underwater and in space, it might be hard to capture on video. But if you can capture it on video, and I'm assuming it's with a phone, but let's say it's worse than that. Let's say it's you've got to have a room full of cameras. Okay, well, we establish the camera room and we stick the subject in there and we do a skill and we put that in the marketplace, and then you can buy your skill for the robot in the marketplace. And that's going to be a whole economic chain in itself. So I really think if we take this, what we've seen in version 12 on the weekend, to the nth degree, very, very exciting technology, and I would say a breakthrough, because this has been talked about, theorized. I know George Hotz from Comma AI has said end-to-end is the answer to this. So he's certainly suggested that's the case. Andre Karpathy, we've heard from him recently, he's posting this week. He's talked about that this was always an ongoing discussion inside Tesla, but there was these limitations, that the AI wasn't ready, the compute wasn't ready, it was really costly, the data set wasn't ready, you have to have millions of cars out there. And so that's my other question, is like, where is this data set for Bot going to come from? And that's to be determined. But very, very exciting, very cool. I just wish that, like, in my head, the thing that I want to know is what I imagine this, and maybe there isn't, maybe it's all digital, it probably should be, but at Tesla, if there's a whiteboard on the wall, what is the priority list that they're going after, the things that they've got to train it on? How many are there, and what's on the priority? Because, that's the determiner of when we get this in our hands, and then ultimately when they can deliver the first robotaxi rides. So, all going well with enough investment. I wouldn't, I would, let's put it this way, I would be surprised if we get to the end of 2023 without this thing being in customer hands, and then by the end of 2024 that we're not seriously talking about some level of robotaxi rides. Maybe the regulation forces them to go region by region to get approval. I think they're well versed in that and well positioned, because they are taking challenges on, like, the insurance, registration. They're doing the virtual power plants on the energy front. Like, they know kind of how to navigate their way through regulation. Even shipping vehicles into multiple countries. I mean, there's a whole lot of nuance that goes into that, and regulatory approval, and the fact that cars have to comply to something like the ADRs. They know all this, right? They've been in the game for long enough, and they've got the expertise. So none of that will be a surprise to Tesla. So yeah, that's probably enough of me rambling today, but I'm pretty stoked by what I've seen, that it wasn't a big regression in V12. It wasn't all over the shop. Very smooth, very natural driving, which is kind of cool, and able to cope with construction zones and that kind of thing. Now, this was, I want to say, one of the easier drives, like, compared to some of the more intense tests that the beta testers have constructed to test the software. I think there was a fairly easy area. I would like to see it under pressure through different environments, and then that's where more of this to-do list is going to be brought out. But yeah, so far so good. And the other, I guess, almost sad thing is I don't know when I'm going to see V12 again, right? Is Elon going to do another stream a week from now, or is that it until the consumers get it? Who knows? But sure is fun watching, I tell you that much. I'm watching very anxiously and want this in my car badly. So the sooner that happens, the better. Thanks, guys. Leave comments below. I love your work.